Have you ever had your entire day completely derailed by a single sentence?
Oh, absolutely.
Or, I mean, let's be honest, sometimes it doesn't even take a full sentence. It's just a heavy sigh from a coworker across the room.
Yeah. Or from your partner in the kitchen.
Right. And instantly your good mood is just gone. Your stomach drops, your mind starts racing, and you are entirely thrown off course. We have all been there.
We really have.
But what if you could just turn that off?
Welcome to today's deep dive. Our mission today is an exciting one. We are exploring some incredibly fascinating notes from a document titled Decoupling the Railroad of Doom.
Haha, it's quite a title.
It is. And the goal here is to learn how to completely remove those daily emotional triggers by separating what you hear from what you actually feel inside. Okay, let's unpack this. The core concept we are looking at today is called cognitive decoupling.
Right.
It sounds a bit technical, but it's basically a strategy to short-circuit your own reactions. It really is.
Yeah.
And to understand why we need a strategy like cognitive decoupling in the first place, we first have to understand the trap our brains naturally fall into.
The shortcuts.
Exactly. The human brain, for all its brilliance, is incredibly prone to taking dangerous shortcuts. What happens during an emotional trial is a perfect example of this. You hear a sound, someone's voice, a specific word, or, that heavy sigh you mentioned.
Yeah.
And your brain doesn't just process it as acoustic data. It immediately attaches a complex story or a judgment to that noise. It assigns motive, it assigns blame, and most dangerously, it makes it entirely about you.
Right, because we are the main characters in our own movie, so obviously everything everyone does must be a reaction to us.
Precisely. And it is that manufactured story, not the sound itself, that sparks a sudden, often overwhelming physical feeling or trigger. You go from hearing a noise to feeling a physiological stress response in a fraction of a second, all because of that mental shortcut.
It's so fast you don't even realize you did it.
You don't. Evolutionarily, it makes sense. If you hear a rustle in the bushes, you don't want to analyze the acoustic properties of the leaves, right?
Yeah.
You want to assume it's a tiger and run.
Sure.
But in a modern office or a living room, that same mechanism causes us to interpret a frustrated tone of voice as a mortal threat to our ego.
That is a wild way to look at it, but it makes perfect sense. We are essentially hallucinating threats. And that brings us to the foundational theory of our notes today, which is adopting the mindset of the objective observer.
Yes, the objective observer.
It reminds us of a basic law of physics that we completely forget the second we feel stressed, which is that words are literally just vibrations in the air. That is all they are, just vibrating air molecules hitting your eardrum until you and only you decide to give them meaning.
And this is where the actual work begins. To stop a trigger, you have to actively insert a wedge of logic between the input and the impact.
The wedge of logic. I love that phrasing.
It's a great visual. The input is that actual physical noise, the vibrating air. The impact is your resulting emotion, the anger or the shame. The wedge of logic is the realization that these two things are not physically connected. When you are triggered, you are reacting strictly to your own interpretation of the sound. You are reacting to your own assumption of what that sound means, not the physical sound itself.
So you pry them apart.
You do. By inserting that wedge of logic, you break the automatic link.
I understand the theory, but I have to ask, how do we actually do that in the heat of the moment? Because if someone is coming at me with an aggressive tone, my brain isn't exactly eager to sit back and philosophize about vibrating air molecules.
That's the real challenge. And that's why the framework provides very specific mechanical techniques to force your brain into that observer state.
Let's dive into the first technique then, sensory isolation. Now, from what I read, the goal here is to strip away all the subtext. You treat incoming information purely as raw data points, not as personal attacks.
That's exactly it.
But what does that look like in practice? Are we just pretending we don't hear them?
Not pretending you don't hear them, but changing how you hear them. What's fascinating here is how practical this becomes when you break it down into acoustic properties. To achieve this sensory isolation, you actively bypass the emotional processing center of your brain by focusing purely on the literal physical characteristics of the person's voice.
Okay.
You listen to the pitch. Is it high or low? You notice the volume. Are the decibels increasing? You observe the tempo. Are they speaking rapidly or slowly?
So you turn into an audio engineer.
Huh, exactly. By forcing your frontal lobe to calculate pitch, volume, and tempo, you occupy the cognitive bandwidth that would otherwise be used to write that stressful, victimized narrative.
You are basically turning a screaming boss into a sound equalizer on a stereo. You're just watching the little digital bars go up and down.
That's a perfect analogy. You give your brain a different, totally neutral task to perform. It's incredibly difficult for the brain to panic about a perceived insult while it is simultaneously trying to accurately gauge the decibel level of the room.
It's a redirect of cognitive resources.
Precisely.
Which perfectly sets up the next visual concept we need to talk about, establishing the internal-external boundary. The idea here is to draw a very clear, definitive line in your mind.
A vital step.
On one side of the line, you have the external world. That is what the other person said, what they're doing. It is out there in the physical space. And then on the other side of the line is your internal garden. That is how you feel, your personal, emotional ecosystem. And the core argument in our notes is that we are terrible at defending the wall between the two.
We are terrible at it because we've been conditioned to be highly porous. We let the external world dictate the weather in our internal garden constantly. But maintaining that boundary is absolutely vital. By consciously acknowledging that their words are physically over there in the external world and your feelings are over here in your internal garden, you create a barrier.
You stop the bleed over.
Yes. This conscious acknowledgement is what stops the automatic toxic bleed over.
It's like reminding yourself that their vocal cords do not have a Bluetooth connection to your nervous system. They can't just press a button and force you to feel something without your active participation.
Exactly. Their vibrating air molecules are not allowed to cross the moat into your internal garden unless you actively lower the drawbridge and permit them to enter. The problem is, most of us have the drawbridge permanently stuck in the down position. We let every stray comment, every weird look, and every heavy sigh march right in and trample the flowers.
So let's talk about the exact moment those invaders try to cross the bridge. I want you to imagine that familiar sting you feel. You know the one. Someone says something sharp and you feel that heat rising in your chest or that sudden pit forming in your stomach. To short-circuit that exact split-second sensation, we have a 3-step translation method. It acts as a mental circuit breaker to stop the physical reaction before it fully takes hold.
The first step of this mental circuit breaker is to label the physicality. When that sting hits, your instinct is usually to make a definitive emotional declaration. You tell yourself, I'm angry or I am hurt.
Or I am humiliated.
Right. The translation method requires you to stop, reject the emotional label, and instead describe the purely physical sensation happening in your body. You say to yourself, I am noticing a tightness in my chest, or I'm feeling heat in my face.
So instead of letting your brain yell, I'm furious, you force yourself to take a step back and just catalog what your body is doing. You tell yourself, okay, my chest feels tight right now. It sounds almost robotic. I love how this turns you into a completely detached scientist, merely observing a specimen.
It is supposed to be robotic. Emotion is chaotic and deeply subjective. Physiology is measurable and objective. By simply saying, I am noticing a tightness, you suddenly turn yourself into that detached scientist. You are no longer the embodiment of the emotion. You are just a neutral party documenting a physiological change in a physical body. It creates instant, necessary distance.
Here's where it gets really interesting.
Okay.
Once you've created that distance, you move to step 2, which is strip the adjectives. This is where you dismantle the actual sentence that triggered you. Let's say someone looks at you and says, that was a stupid mistake. Normally that would ruin your afternoon. But with this step, you mentally translate their sentence. You strip it down so it becomes, the speaker has categorized this event as stupid.
The mechanics of why this works are incredibly powerful. When you say, the speaker has categorized this event as stupid, you are actively stripping away the objective truth of the statement.
But what if it was a mistake? What if I genuinely messed up a presentation or forgot a deadline? Isn't it just a fact?
Even if the error is a factual reality, the word stupid is a moral judgment. It is a subjective label, not a physical law of the universe. Our brains tend to accept criticism, especially from authority figures or loved ones, as a universal fact about our identity. But by framing it as their categorization, you return the statement to what it actually is, a mere opinion.
Just one data point.
Exactly. It is just one human subjective data label applied in one specific moment based on their limited perspective. It holds no ultimate truth over your reality.
You are changing it from a fact about your worth into a mere observation about their mental filing system. It's not about me being stupid. It's about them pulling the stupid folder out of their cabinet to describe a situation. That is a massive shift. Which brings us to the final part of the circuit breaker, step 3, the foreign language trick. I want you to imagine that the person who is triggering you, the one raising their voice or making that cutting remark, is suddenly speaking a language you do not understand at all. But they are using the exact same aggressive tone, the exact same volume, and the exact same facial expressions.
This thought experiment really brings the whole theory together. If they were speaking a foreign language with that same angry tone, you would still hear the noise. You would still recognize the emotion. You would know they were upset based on their body language.
But you wouldn't feel the insult.
Because you don't comprehend the specific vocabulary, you wouldn't feel the insult. It wouldn't hit your internal garden. You might feel confused or even curious, but you wouldn't feel a deep personal attack on your character.
I get the logic there, but realistically, when someone is yelling in my face, my heart rate spikes instantly. How do I force my brain to pause and pretend it's a foreign language when my adrenaline is already pumping?
It's not about denying the adrenaline. It's about giving the adrenaline nowhere to go. When the heart rate spikes, the brain frantically searches for the reason for the panic. If it locks onto the English words "you are incompetent," it validates the panic and spirals.
It feeds the fire.
Yes. By actively visualizing them speaking a foreign language, you are essentially scrambling the signal. You acknowledge the threat display, the tone, and the volume, but you deny your brain the specific semantic meaning it needs to craft a story of personal victimization. This definitively proves the core thesis. The emotional pain you experience comes strictly from your own internal translation of the words, not from their actual voice.
The pain is coming from our own dictionary, not their vocal cords. It is entirely an inside job. Okay, that's a lot of heavy psychology. Let's move away from the theory and look at how this plays out in real life. We have 3 highly relatable examples here from the source text, and the goal is to apply these tools. We want to turn that old emotional script into detached data. Let's start with scenario 1, the late report. The trigger, what you actually hear, is your boss saying, "This report is late again."
And the old feeling, the automatic script your brain writes without cognitive decoupling, is catastrophic. Office culture conditions us to link our output to our survival. So you hear "late again," and you immediately think, they think I'm a failure, my reputation is ruined, I'm definitely going to get fired.
How will I pay my mortgage?
Exactly. You take a simple observation about a timeline and spin it into a crisis of identity and survival.
Right, the drawbridge is down and the panic is storming the castle. But if we apply the detached reframe, we strip away the adjectives and the assumed intent. We turn it into pure data. The reframe here is a human is expressing a preference for a different timeline.
Precisely. A human is expressing a preference for a different timeline. By phrasing it this way, you are completely removing your self-worth from the equation. It is no longer an indictment of your value as an employee. It is just a scheduling discrepancy between 2 mammals.
2 mammals with calendars.
Yes. Once you view it as a mere discrepancy in preferences, you can actually address the problem calmly by adjusting the timeline or managing expectations instead of defending your ego.
That clinical detachment is great for the office, but what happens when the stakes are much higher? Let's move to scenario 2, the partner sigh. You are sitting on the couch or doing the dishes, and your partner just lets out a long, heavy exhale. The old feeling that immediately rushes in is guilt or defensiveness. They're annoyed with me. I've done something wrong. I am a burden to them.
We read a whole Shakespearean tragedy based entirely on a breath.
We really do.
This raises an important question about how much we project our own insecurities onto ambiguous sounds. A sigh is essentially a blank canvas, and we immediately paint our deepest relationship fears all over it. When we use the detached reframe on a sigh, we force ourselves to look at the literal physics of the event. The reframe is simply, air is leaving a pair of lungs at a high velocity.
Air is leaving a pair of lungs at a high velocity. I love how delightful that is. It completely deflates the tension.
It does, because that is the only objective fact in the room. This physical action merely indicates physiological fatigue, a need for oxygen, or perhaps general undefined stress. It does not necessarily have anything to do with you, and it certainly isn't a direct indictment of your relationship.
But if you assume it is, you start a fight.
Exactly. If you assume it's about you, you're likely going to respond defensively, which will actually create the argument you are afraid of. By decoupling, you just observe the air leaving the lungs, and you can casually ask, "Long day." Instead of snapping, "What's your problem?"
It's amazing how much unnecessary conflict we invent just by translating ambiguous noises poorly.
Okay, let's tackle the toughest one. Scenario 3, the family insult. You're at a holiday dinner or on a phone call, and someone says, "You're acting just like your mother." The old feeling is immediate explosive defense mode. That's an insult to my characters, an insult to my family line. This is an attack.
Family dynamics are often the ultimate test of cognitive decoupling because the historical baggage is so heavy. Families know exactly where your buttons are because they are the ones who installed them. When they say you're acting just like your mother, they aren't making a casual observation. They are deploying a highly calibrated weapon. But the detached reframe remains incredibly effective precisely because of that.
So how do we translate that? How do we neutralize a weapon designed specifically for us?
Through this new lens, you translate that loaded sentence into a series of syllables has been uttered to elicit a specific reaction.
You strip away the history, the trauma, and the complex family dynamics, and you just look at the mechanics of the manipulation. You acknowledge that the speaker is pressing a button they know exists, hoping to get a rise out of you. By viewing it this way, you allow yourself to calmly observe their attempt to provoke you. You see the bait dangling in the water, but you simply choose not to bite.
You remain the detached scientist observing their behavior rather than becoming an active participant in their drama. You see the mechanics and you just let the syllables fall onto the floor. It is so empowering. So, what does this all mean? How do we wrap up everything we've explored today? Our notes leave us with one final ultimate pro tip. Most people's triggers, the harsh things they say to you, the aggressive tones they use, are actually just confessions of their own internal state.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, it requires a profound empathy shift. When someone yells at you, when they lash out or use hurtful adjectives, they aren't actually describing you. You are just the closest target in their vicinity. What they're actually doing is describing out loud their own inability to regulate their emotions, their volume, their tone, their choice of cruel words. These are all symptoms of their internal chaos, not an accurate reflection of your worth or your reality.
They are essentially holding up a giant neon sign that says, I am currently overwhelmed and lack the tools to process my feelings.
Precisely. Recognizing this allows you to view their outburst not as a threat to your internal garden, but as a leak in their own emotional plumbing. You don't take it personally when a pipe blows in someone else's house. You might observe it, you might even help them clean it up if you choose to, but you don't internalize it as a flaw in your own home.
A leak in their emotional plumbing. I think that is the perfect image to keep in mind. And that brings us to the incredible power you now hold as a listener. Whether you are prepping for a tense corporate meeting or you are getting ready to navigate a tricky weekend with your family, you now have the tools to protect your internal garden. You do not have to let their chaos become your reality. You can use the wedge of logic, you can observe the physical data of their voice, and you can literally turn their insults back into simple, harmless air vibrations. You are the sole guard at the drawbridge. You get to decide what meaning crosses your borders.
Which leaves us with a final thought to mull over, a natural extension of everything we've explored today. If emotional pain is truly generated by our own internal translation of harmless air vibrations, it begs a fascinating question. How much of our daily stress isn't actually inflicted upon us by the outside world at all, but is secretly authored by our very own inner translator? And if we are the ones who wrote the dictionary that translator uses, doesn't that mean we have the ultimate power to rewrite it?